Hi, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. And today I want to talk about whether winning is important. Is winning important or not? No. No. Alexa, done recording. Honey, I'm done. Okay, fine. Alexa, now recording. Sorry. I just decided to get dramatic a bit. Give me a second for the camera to adjust to all the harsh lights on it. So no. No is obviously the simple, easy answer, but I think this is actually a slightly more complicated conversation, or a slightly more nuanced conversation. It's not that complicated. Winning should not be important for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And I think this is really a tangent to a conversation, a video that I actually filmed at one point. I really want to redo it, though. It's never actually gone live. But a video called What Makes a Game Fun? This is a conversation I started with Jeremy Howard way back in the day, which is why I want to do that video with him at some point. But it's the idea of what makes a game fun. What adds to the fun factor of a game? Why is it that for me, I don't like that game and you love that game? And then for me, I love this game and you don't like that game. What makes a game fun? And winning might be part of that conversation. Ultimately, why do we play games? What is it that makes us decide to sit down and play a game? What's the various aspect of enjoyment? Because part of that other video, which I'll do at some point, of what makes a game fun, for me that video is more centered on various mechanics or various aspects of a game that I look at it and say, this is the kind of game I'm going to enjoy. But this is a higher level conversation of what makes a game fun to begin with? Why do we play games? Why do we sit down at the table? What is it about this hobby that we like? And there is something primal about wanting to win. There is that concept of, you did well. I played a game, I did well, I came out on top. Look at my score, I did better than everyone else. I saw those pathways better than everyone else. But winning shouldn't really be important. As a starting basis as to why I think winning should not be your goal, and it might be your goal, that's a different conversation entirely, but as a starting basis as to why I think it shouldn't be the reason why we play games, is if our goal is winning, that is very likely to have a giant amount of determination over what we play, and whether we're in board games at all, as opposed to another hobby. See, I chose the games on the table very specifically because I just wanted games on the table, but as a starting baseline, we have cooperative games over here. If your goal is winning, you shouldn't be playing anything other than cooperative or solo experiences. The reason being that if winning is what makes a game fun, if the aspect of winning a game, meaning if you play a game and you enjoy it this much if you don't win and this much if you do win, then you should be playing games where winning happens more often, right? Because in a standard 4-player game, assuming you're playing against players of equal skill, then, or roughly equal skill, then you should be winning roughly 25% of the time. Or in other words, if you're playing games to win, you're only serving your purpose 1 out of 4 plays, which just seems like not that rewarding. But if you play a cooperative game, maybe you could win 50% of the time. Maybe you can win 75% of the time. If you play a solo game, maybe you can win more often. Or we have trivia over here. Trivia, because trivia, and these games I have reasons why I like them, we'll talk about that later. But trivia should be a better pastime than games if your goal is winning. See, trivia is a general concept, and these games are a bit of an exception, but trivia, if you have a trivia night, a trivia event, whatnot, more often than not, the winner is determined before the people walk into the room. The questions are laid out, the people attending are there, there is no strategic opposition of how to engage with the other players. The winner is determined as soon as the questions are formed and the invite list is formed. But maybe you'll win. That's something where winning has an impact where strategy does not, because I think the main reasons to play games are likely going to fall into one of 3 categories. The desire to win, the fact that winning is fun, the desire to play well strategically, which is a very different concept, and then the desire to be social. And there's some degree of overlap, because one of the things you might say is, well, I don't want to play a cooperative game that's easy. Winning is only fun because it's a challenge. In which case I would say, no, winning is not what's fun. The challenge is what's fun. The strategy is what's fun. To take a step back, the idea of winning versus winning against well-fought players. What's more enjoyable to you? The idea that you had a good game where the scores were... In fact, let me give a more specific example. What is your preference? If you're someone who likes winning games, what do you rather? A game where you won by 50 points, or a game where you lost by 2? What is a better, more desirable outcome to a game that you sit down at? I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, it's going to be that losing by a small hair. Losing by a small margin is a much more rewarding outcome because that feels like a well-fought game. It feels like a balance of two players going head-to-head and someone coming out the winner, but we saw the strategies, we pursued them, we executed, and then yes, you won. Versus winning a game by a large margin, I personally don't find rewarding. I found that to be a fluke. Oh, great, I got a good combination of cards, I had better rolls. Something happened in this game, or the game's just not that well designed, but something happened in such a way where I won by a huge margin, you had a terrible time, and it just wasn't as much fun. I don't play games to win, I play games to execute on the strategic aspect, and the social aspect. The social aspect is a factor as well. And I think that strategic implementation of what you're trying to do is a big part of why multiplayer solitaire is often considered a critique. Because multiplayer solitaire, if the goal is to win, that shouldn't be a critique of a game. Multiplayer solitaire, for context, is the idea where you have a game where you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, and we interact not at all or a minimal amount. So we're both playing our own games, and then we check to see who won at the end. If the goal is winning, that should not be a critique of gaming at all. Now, I'm not saying multiplayer is not fun. Multiplayer is fun, but at least for myself, I do agree that multiplayer solitaire is a critique. The more removed we are from the interaction of players, the more we go back to that question of, is the winner determined as soon as the cards are drawn and the situation is at play, or not? Or do you get to impose and interact the elements of strategy? Do I get to see what your move is and react accordingly? Do you get to see a move that I didn't see and you get to snatch something out from under me? The way you place your workers, the way you play your cards, the way you walk into combat, the way you read what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, the way you call my bluff. Those are all aspects of strategy. They're not aspects of winning. I think the goal for me, and again, for you can do what you want. I'm not here to pass judgment on what your reason is. I would say that many of you likely agree with me that the goal shouldn't be to win. Of course not. But why is the execution of strategy a better goal than the execution of trying to win? These are artificial things, artificial constructs we've imposed ourselves on the hobby that we play, that we engage with. I don't think one is inherently better. I think one is practically better because of that winning aspect. Every single time I sit down at the table, 100% of my gaming sessions involve me having fun because I am applying that aspect of choice, that aspect of strategy to the game, and the social element as well. So I'm winning by very nature of the fact that the reason I play games happens in every single game I play. Versus someone whose goal is to win will find themselves to being disappointed a lot more frequently. And speaking of the social element is a huge part as well of why I like games, and it's a huge part of game design that I think is often present. Things like catch-up mechanics. A catch-up mechanic is the idea that as players do well, the people in last place have some sort of reason, incentive, some sort of extra mechanic that the game gives them that lets them get a little bit more of a push ahead. Not necessarily enough to win, but enough to keep them in the game and make them still a viable contender in whatever game you are playing. And some people hate catch-up mechanics. Some people despise them, because if your goal is winning, of course you should despise them. A catch-up mechanic is the reward of a lack of skill. A catch-up mechanic is, or possibly the reward of a lack of luck, but however you phrase it, if the goal was to do well at the game that you're playing, and someone else isn't, for whatever reason it is, a catch-up mechanic lets them get past that. If the goal is winning, that's a bad thing. If the goal is being strategic, it means that I can continue to engage in strategic choices for a longer period of time. In a 2-hour-long game in which other players are left behind in points and I just get to conquer everyone, I am no longer being strategic. I'm spending the rest of the hour engaged in things that don't have that reward because my goal is strategy. And so catch-up mechanics keep people in the game and they force me to continuously be on my toes. If my goal is the execution of strategic choice, of seeing the patterns and seeing how to win through it, catch-up mechanics make the game better for me. Similarly with being social. If your goal is being social, catch-up mechanics allow players to stay in the game for a longer amount of time. That is generally a good thing. If the goal is to spend time together, that's why games like Risk or games like Monopoly or any of these older games that often have player elimination, catch-up mechanics or a lack of player elimination, those things keep people at the table, they keep people engaged, they reward the strategic aspect, they reward the social aspect, they do not reward the desire to win. The desire to win should have player elimination, that's totally fine. Lack of catch-up mechanics should be totally fine. So a big part of game design is focusing on what people think makes games more fun. I don't come back to game night every single night to play Monopoly and Risk. I come back to game night every night to play other games like Paleo, Spirit Island. I haven't actually played Dawn of the Zeds. I've heard good things about it. I need to play it. Terra, America, and Timeline. For context, as a brief interlude, the reason Terra, America, and Timeline are games in my collection, despite the fact that I don't actually like trivia as a concept, because again, trivia to me is decided before the game starts, is because there's a great amount of gamification around these games. Terra, America, and Timeline, while trivia is a factor and will help you, there's a large amount of gamification around the choices and the strategic elements at play that make it not just about what you know. So that's why I have them in my collection. But despite all of this construct of why do we play games, winning, social, strategy, all those different aspects, at the end of the day, I think winning is important. Or more specifically, how we win, when we actually dominate other players and what we do along the way. I don't think it's important for me to win ever. But I think sometimes it's important for me to lose. And this is a complicated conversation, and some of you already know where I'm going with this to a degree, but it's still a complicated conversation. There are multiple times where winning or losing, or how badly you win or lose, can be a factor in other players' enjoyment at the table. And if the goal, which for me, my goal is to play games, then things that make people feel more welcome at the table, things that add to the amount of fun someone has, those are far more desirable than the aspect of winning or not winning. Now, speaking for myself, by the way, as a tangent before we get into there, my goal, I like winning games, but if you sat me down for the very first time with a new game, I'd rather lose than win. Lose by a small amount, ideally. There is something punishing or frustrating by losing by such a huge margin that you're like, I don't even know if I get this, I don't know if it's fun, you got stomped on. There is something that makes being stomped on not quite as much fun. But I like losing by a little bit, because it means that I have another reason to dive back in. I feel like I haven't mastered it yet. If my goal is to find the strategic paths, then I want to dive in again because I clearly haven't found them yet. But past that, and my own separate separate choices or desires as far as how I approach games, I think there are three basic times where winning or losing and the choice you make along the way is important. The first is winning against a person or group of people that you just taught the game. If you have just taught a game for the first time to a group of people, whoever it is, and you proceed to pull out Blood Rage, you teach everyone at the table, and then you proceed to stomp on them throughout the night, that is not a fun experience for others involved. Now, for some it will be. Some people like that challenge. Some people like being thrust into the heat of it and then being able to show, look how well I did, or alternatively to come back the next time with a desire to improve. So not for everyone will it be an immediate elimination. But it is not the best thing, in my opinion, to teach a bunch of people a game and then do exceedingly well at that game. As a starting baseline, and this is more relevant to how to teach games, but as a starting baseline, if you are teaching someone a game for the first time, you're teaching a group of people, help them not just with the rules, but with the strategy. Point out things that you might be able to do. By the way, just so you know, I just drafted this card, and that means I can probably do X, Y, and Z if you're not careful. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm just saying, yeah, I want you to know the strategy so that, you know, if it happens, it's on you and not on me. Those are relevant things. Hitting someone unawares. I remember the first time I played Twilight Struggle, a long time ago. The first time I played Twilight Struggle, and I lost to the other player. Because I can't remember what the card is, but there's a card towards the end of the game that you can play the card, and if you're far enough ahead on the DEFCON track, whatever it is, it's instantaneous win. I didn't even know that card existed. Now, to be fair, the person I was playing with didn't either. It was both of our first time in the game, so not his fault. But had that happened to me from an experienced player, had I lost the game through a mechanic that I didn't even know I could lose, that would be far more frustrating. It would be like, why? Why did you not teach me that important aspect of the game we just played? Don't you think it's important that I know how I can lose the game? And so I think if you are teaching new players a game, you should either don't try that hard to win, or what I personally do, because if for me the enjoyment is seeing those strategies and seeing those options play out, then also that means for me it's important to try to win. I think one thing I didn't really touch upon is the idea that winning isn't important. Trying to win, I think, is absolutely important, although again, it depends on your goal. If the reason you play games is to be social, trying to win isn't that important either. If the reason you play games is for strategy, trying to win is essential because by not trying to win, you are removing that goal from the other players at the table. And so for me, I want to try to win, and I want the other players at the table to try to win, because my goal is that hybrid of strategy and social. But going back to teaching players games, I like to try to win. So what I do when I teach someone a game for the first time is I try new strategies. I find the most ridiculous, off-the-cuff strategy that I could possibly think of for the game, and then I charge for it 100% to see where it takes me. More often than not, I end up not doing quite as well as I normally would, which is fine. I tried something new, I tried as hard as I could at that new thing, I failed, it didn't work, but other players get to have a good time. I didn't stomp them. Once in a while, sadly, I actually find a really good strategy that works really well, and then I stomp the new players, or at least win with the new players, so that's a factor. But I think when you teach a game, you should either not win, or not win by a lot. The second one is similar, but perhaps a little more personal, which is playing a game against a partner. If you're teaching a partner a game for the first time, and you do particularly well, and you have to know your partner too, you have to know what they prefer. Again, going back to my personal taste, I am totally fine losing. If anything, I prefer to lose my first game. But I think when you're teaching your partner a game, different people react differently. Some people like that thrill of feeling like they did well at something new. Others like the challenge of feeling that they got close, but not that well. And so knowing your partner is a factor, but I don't think there's anything wrong with, again, not necessarily throwing a game, but trying different strategies, or perhaps being a little less cutthroat in your initial plays. You know, sure, the strategy I could have taken, I could have pursued, that may have actually, well, you know, made it that I won by a lot. And maybe I don't do that thing. Ideally, things that aren't obvious. You don't want the person thinking you're throwing the game, but being a little less cutthroat in your decisions is not necessarily a bad thing, which brings us to the third one, which is playing games with kids. And I think with kids it's the most important, because kids are inherently seeking to do well in life. It's part of what we do growing up. We go through that process of figuring out what we're good at, what we're not good at, and we tend to spend more time on the things we're good at, which is only natural. If we're good at something, we want to do it again. If you bring your kids to a new game, and you proceed to do particularly well, don't be surprised if they don't have that rush to play that game, or perhaps any games if they're losing them all, again. People like being good at things. Half the reason the conversation about winning is an important one is because people like being good at things. People like that feeling of, oh, look, I won. And you sometimes have to remind them, you're only going to win 25% of the time in a 4-player game. In a 5-player game, only 20% of the time. In a 3-player game, 33% of the time. None of those involve you winning as much as you might like to. But when it comes to kids, I think it's important to allow them to win here and there, if they're not already. Sometimes there's games that they're particularly good at. Sometimes there's games that have a higher focus on luck that might give them more of a chance of winning, even if you're both playing well. Pulling your punches isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you do it forever. It's not a bad thing if you do it occasionally. I remember hearing a quote once about the nature of playing against people who are better than you. The example used was Roger Federer, who's an amazing tennis player. But if I go into a tennis match or whatever with Roger Federer and I lose, I didn't lose the game. I didn't even play. There's an aspect of gaps of skill you have to be mindful of, and trying to bridge those gaps of skill, trying to bridge the fact that you might know a game better in a way so that it's not punishing. Because I guarantee you, if I go into a tennis match with Roger Federer and he's trying his best and I'm trying my best, I have no interest in doing that experience ever again. I will be destroyed. I won't land a single hit. It will be a frustrating, demoralizing experience for me. Not that it should have been anything else, because we're just playing on different levels. And so accounting for those gaps in different levels, either by choosing games that have inherent handicaps, or making so that you're handicapping yourself to bridge those gaps. I'm not even saying win or don't win. You have to know the people you're playing with to that. But I am saying don't stomp on people. Winning may not be important. It's certainly not important from my stance of what I like to do in games. But it might be important to be mindful of winning and how to win, depending on who you're playing against, depending on the situation, and depending on finding a way to bring people into this hobby. Like I said at the beginning, I think if your goal is to win, then I think you're in the wrong hobby. I think you're in a hobby that will just not reward you with that goal quite as often as you'd like. And if the goal is strategy or being social, then winning is just a side aspect of that. You can play strategically the entire game and strategically miss your shot when it's relevant. You can be social by having people be invested and involved the entire time, by having them feeling like they did well, like they played well. And so sometimes throwing a game is far more important than winning. I said that wrong, messed it up. Sometimes throwing a game is far more important than winning a game. That's basically it. I don't think it's important. I think it depends on who you are. I think there's different reasons people play games. For me, winning's just not that important at all. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.